The World of Tanks console meta might be changing in a massive way with the latest updates to the game, which I've covered in the past couple of uploads, but today I wanted to specifically focus on how the game is going to actually change and what tank classes are probably going to be affected the most by these changes. So first things first is probably the biggest thing for a lot of vehicles, one that affects every single vehicle in the game, will be the removal of steady aim and rapid loading. This is not coming with the update, at least from what I can tell. It is something that is preliminary talked about and, you know, will potentially come somewhere on later on down the line. But with this coming, I think it is very important to talk about the state of the meta, what it means. Obviously, meta is just a word for like the most competitive, the best. If we're going to talk about like if you were to play like a very, very hard game, you know, you're playing up against some of the top players in the world and you're all on like equal pegging, I guess, with regards to whether your skill ability is better than the other. So you're all equal on skill level. These would be the tanks that are picked the most because of the fact that they're like super meta in terms of how they play. So with that being said, obviously I think it's important that we talk about the most played vehicles. I saw this on Clone Guy's video recently where he talked about high alpha TDs and TDs just generally being played the most. Obviously I've used watt marks for a long time, so this is a marks calculation website to see how much damage you need to do in various different tanks to see how much damage you need to actually get the marks of excellence. Is a really good tool. The link will be in the description if you want to check out and you're trying to go for marks of excellence. It's really handy. It's specifically for console players as opposed to you know, PC players and what you might see on the internet. So as well as that, we've got watt stars. So this is a general, it calculates all of the sample battles that people have played in all of the various different tanks across a huge range of data. So right from the very beginning of it being tracked, it's probably not 100% accurate compared to Wargaming's own internal data because obviously they have the actual data. But I believe that this is pulled off of some API that Wargaming have. So it should be very accurate for the most part, if not the exact same. But of course we don't know 100% with regards to the website and how it's ran. But in terms of the changes, what tank classes are going to be affected the most, those are probably going to be these high alpha TDs, which is the impetus, I think, for a lot of the changes that Wargaming are going to be making over the next few months, I guess, or at least their current roadmap for all of these updates that are coming out. So the updates are not just, for example, commander skills, equipment, and consumables. They've got a whole host of other things that they're also going to be doing. So if we have a look at the upcoming changes, we have got balance changes. So these include changes to tank statistics within the game, whether that be tech tree or premium vehicles, because they did mention that this will start with a small sample size for premium vehicles, and they'll be balancing these premium vehicles to level the playing field between premiums and tech tree vehicles, which I think has been long awaited. And including in the first set that they're looking at is the SU-152 Turan and the FE-4003 Centurion Mark V AVRE. In my opinion, the AVRE, if you were to just simply remove the spaced armor plate off the front of the vehicle, making it literally just a Centurion, but it has the derp, probably would help out a lot with a lot of the players that find this tank a struggle to deal with, or simply maybe making the HE even worse. I don't really know, or make the reload a lot worse, or make the gun a hell of a lot less accurate. But accuracy is something we'll get into as to why some of these tanks probably are going to get nerfed way more, even with the changes that they're going to be doing specifically to these vehicles like the SU-152 Turan. So, what is the big problem? Why is there such an issue with the current meta within the game, and how can it change? Now, just as a caveat, I'm not a huge Cold War player. I have played in Cold War. I review the premium vehicles that come out in Cold War and see what other people are saying who are more well versed in Cold War in terms of day to day. I don't really play it a whole lot, but probably have 500 games or something overall in Cold War. It's not my favorite mode. I find it a bit boring. But there are definitely some big issues, especially in certain eras, with certain vehicles being really overpowered. We know the Weasel 1A1, we know the FE 4005 in Era 1, we know the Weasel Mark 1, and the Weasel Tow. So I don't know what the official designation for either one is, but either way, the missile launching one and the autocannon one, very bad for the actual health of the game. And so, yeah, the actual tanks that are being played the most, we can come onto for some more recent data, because obviously the tank statistics on WatchStars are only over like the history of World of Tanks. So you can see how many sample battles they've actually got. So the most played tank currently E4 with nearly 8 million battles. So a lot of people playing the E4. But in terms of local or recent, so something in the last 30 days, I think, is for the actual What Console info marks. So this is saying 231,000 battles in the FE 4005, the Era 1 version. So this is not the World War II version, we're talking about the Cold War version. And this is primarily due to the fact that the tank is much better statistically than what you see in World War II, because it's faster, it has a big gun, and it has really good accuracy, making it very deadly in Era 1, considering you're playing up against tanks that aren't particularly that good. And pretty much World War II tanks, things like the T-44, T-54, that sort of thing. And so the FE is just dominating down at that era. And with 231,000 battles, it puts it 2.3 times more than what you see with the Iron Rain, which is the second most played vehicle in the last 30 days with 104,000 battles, which is crazy as well. And you can see as we go down the list, obviously Clone Guy mentioned this in his video, that this list is filled with TDs. And this is something I wanted to talk about a long time ago, but I just didn't get round to making the video, and you guys have seen my comments on high alpha TDs long before any of these changes or announcements came out anyway. But in terms of the most played tanks, we have a FE 4005 high alpha, Iron Rain, 1500 clip potential, basically 1470 I think it is actually, but then you've got a T95E3. I think this is like one of the starter vehicles in Era 1, or at least like maybe it's a good, or it's been given out for free. So that's 85,000 games. FE 107, is it the Scimitar or something like that? I don't know. And then we've got a Weasel 1A1, which is the Tow. So obviously everyone knows about this one, the Era 3 Nightmare fuel that has basically been harassing players since its introduction. We've got the Gorilla, high alpha TD, Big Light Panzer, which is very strong, I believe, the M103A1. Then we've got the FE 4005 World War II version, which is high alpha TD. M1A2 Abrams, I just think it's an American vehicle that's widely known, so probably gets played more than some of the other tanks because it's known. It's like the E100 and something like, I don't know, all of the American tanks, basically, they get played a lot because a lot of the player base are American and they want to play tanks that they have known throughout their history or whatever. So yeah, that's typically what happens. Then we got the E4 high alpha TD T32A Proto, which was given out as part of a season pass reward, or at least an earn operation recently. I think it's actually the season pass rank 100 reward, hence why it's probably played a lot more recently. FE4211, very overpowered tank that was first introduced into Cold War at the inception of Cold War, pretty much. The Thumper. So this was a tank given out for free as part of a season pass reward that has always been very good. Waffle E100, obviously very high clip potential, pretty much the highest of any in World War II. The Marder 1A3, not particularly well versed, I don't really know, so I'll leave that one up. Then the NM116 Panzerjäger, one of the highest DPM tier 8 vehicles in the game that is absolutely broken with its camo and movement, its DPM, its reload speed. The alpha damage that it gets is very nice because of the fact that you can reload so quickly that you can constantly retrack people whilst remaining undetected with insane accuracy, insane view range, very, very solid camo to the point where you don't get detected a lot of the time. It's just a tank that if you play in as a experienced player can net you, 4,000 damage to get the gold mark, which if we were to look at, let's find Gorilla 15, 5,806, that is a massive difference in terms of damage, so with 1,700 extra damage in the Gorilla 15, but the fact that this is a tier 8 vehicle compared to a tier 10 one is actually not that much of a difference, to be honest. And then you've got the Turan, high alpha TD, Centurion AVRE, high alpha medium with a derp. For some reason, the HMC M8, I mean, why are people playing tier 4 so much? I don't know. E5, it's just a solid tank. FV215B183, high alpha TD, SU130 PM, high alpha TD, a tier 8, which is very good, but is pretty much the Soviet version of the Scorpion G, but probably looks better, so people like using it. I don't know. Waffle Panzer IV, high alpha TD, if you're using the 15cm, and is also required to get to the Waffle E100 and the Gorilla, which are some of the most played tanks at the moment. We'll skip out tier 3s and 4s and stuff, and then you come down to the IS-7, just a very beginner push tank, so lots of people recommend the IS-7 as like a beginner tank, so that's why it's probably there. Then you got more TDs, Borsig, E100, and generally just high alpha tanks in general, so it's just that sort of thing. And even if we look at tier 10, you can see this problem only gets worse. So Gorilla 15, FV, E4, Waffle, Turan, AVRE, all 6 of these tanks have over 700 damage, if not 800. In fact, they all have 850 minimum, which is crazy. Literally crazy that the first 6 tanks most played in the game have 850. You got the E5, which has a little bit less, obviously at 400. FE215B once again back up to the high alpha, IS-7 back down to the low alpha, E100 high alpha, Leopard 1 very strong tank. Then we got a console kind of exclusive, although it isn't a console exclusive anymore, the Chieftain. And then we've got the T92 artillery, obviously, T57 heavy, which is of course a high alpha heavy tank with 1600 clip potential. It might be higher now. I can't quite remember if they buffed the alpha to 420. MBTB, which was a recent one, and then T95 E6 and blah blah blah. Jaegeru Type 5. Generally, it's just high alpha vehicles. You're not seeing a whole lot of medium tanks with low alpha, or at least if you are seeing those, they typically have a autoloader, or it is something that has been released as part of a free reward, which is meaning that mediums are looking pretty bad in terms of the composition of the teams, which is why we're probably seeing just TD spams in your games. I mean, in recent games, my TDs, to give a perspective, pretty much anywhere from about a third to a half of the game are TDs in the games that I play. If you play tier 8 and above, that is pretty much half of the team, which when you consider that there are 5 different classes that people can play, albeit one of them is artillery, so it doesn't really count. Having half of the team as just TDs is pretty ridiculous. And it means if you play tanks that aren't well equipped against TDs, something like a heavy tank or a medium or a light tank, for example, so basically all 3 of them, you do get whacked very consistently. But how do we then drag it back to how the meta is changing and what's going to happen when all of these updates do finally enter into the game? So we'll go all the way back to where is it? The dev blog and the remove skills. So I touched on this, being steady aim and rapid loading are going to be removed from the game. At least that's what Wargaming has said that they are probably going to be doing. And so steady aim obviously gives you a 10% increase to accuracy across the board, which is very, very impactful on how the game actually plays, because 10% increased accuracy may mean that your tank that does miss no longer misses if you actually fully aim, which means that when they do remove this from the game, so getting rid of it, it means that tanks can actually miss now. And what tanks typically have the worst sort of accuracy, where a 10% reduction in their accuracy would make a massive effect? It would be the tanks that have the worst accuracy, which typically are going to be vehicles that have those big guns. So if we take a look at the actual tank, so if we open up the Tankopedia and go to the UK and then Tank Destroyers, destroyers and we go to the FE4005 stage 2, the base accuracy of this tank is sat at 0.37. So what happens when you give it a 10% increase? It goes down to 0.33 roughly, like 0.333 or something like that. And then obviously you get the enhanced combat rations, which then boost this tank even further. So that is an additional bit of accuracy. And then obviously if you have the active boost from enhanced combat rations, it goes down even more. And then if you have, whilst moving the turret, you get an additional accuracy bonus. So I believe that's snapshot or the alternative of whatever they've renamed the crew skill to. And then if you have run and gun, adds an additional 10% increase to accuracy when moving the vehicle, meaning that this accuracy value can go significantly down. Albeit, you know, when you're moving, you're going to have worse accuracy than when you're stationary. So the optimal, it would be something in the region of about 0.32, 0.31 or something like that when you are stationary, which as a baseline, if we then go back to here and we look at the medium tanks, so let's look at a tier 10 medium, the FE4202, which is, you know, a tank that's been in the game for a while. It has a base accuracy of 0.32, which is very, very good and is, you know, relatively decent compared to a lot of the other tanks. Obviously, this will get boosted as well when you use all of the accuracy perks and makes it like literally a laser if you're fully aiming. But considering that your tank destroyer with the biggest gun in the game can essentially be the same accuracy, if not better, when you do put all of the perks and equipment on at the moment, makes it very, very strong and basically never really misses unless you aim badly or you get very unlucky with the like how it actually lands, or maybe you didn't quite see that certain part of the tank is not visible or something, you hit something in between you. You know, it's mainly user error when the accuracy is so good compared to it being a you know, a problem that you are too far away with something like the FE4005, making using the high alpha TDs very, very good at long ranges compared to what they typically used to be, whereby the drawback of using such high alpha would be that you had to go in a little bit closer because your accuracy was just a little bit too worse. And whilst you could use them further away, which was valid, it isn't necessarily optimal, and often you would miss and it wouldn't go where you aimed and it would fly off down below or whatever. And then I think Wargaming also changed the percentage chance of it actually going in the middle of your reticle compared to what PC has, where it is like an even spread as to how it's more likely to be distributed in the center of the reticle, and it kind of gets worse and worse as it goes out. I think that's how they use it on PC. But either way, the accuracy obviously makes a massive impact to tank destroyers that in terms of how you can play them. This is the issue, is how you can play a tank destroyer that has such high alpha. And obviously the problem with having high alpha tank destroyers that can sit at the back and hit things so reliably now with the current setup and all of the perks and crews and everything that you can put into your tank, your equipment and everything like that, is the fact that obviously when you're doing 1800 damage, 1600 damage, 1200 damage, 850 damage, you can basically 3-shot or 2-shot every tank in the entire game, including the healthiest vehicles in the game, including heavy tanks. And so it's pretty bad. And obviously then when we add in rapid loading, which is a 10% DPM buff, which we never used to have, which because of the fact that we had gun rammer, which is a equipment slot, they added in rapid loading, and they also have a gun rammer, so you could get 20% boost to your reload speed. It means that, of course, tank destroyers reload quicker and they can catch people out better, and they reload faster, which may mean you can get 2 shots into a person when they pull out versus only getting 1 shot, and then, you know, you're waiting 3 seconds after they've gone back into cover until you can fire. So the shorter you make the reload, the more chance that they've got at getting multiple shots into someone. It makes sense, obviously, and so that makes them more effective at being able to get DPM. So when we talk about DPM, you could have 20,000 DPM, but if you're only firing 1 shot in your entire minute, so you could do 1 shot that did 20,000 damage, yes, okay. you can do 20,000 damage, but you can only hit someone once, so you could only take out one tank. If, for example, you had 5,000 DPM, but you reloaded every 15 seconds, you have multiple chances at taking out multiple people. So DPM on its own is not necessarily like the best case, like it doesn't mean everything, and so effective DPM is a real thing. So, you know, if you've got a tank that has higher alpha, it can tend to have, if it has decent DPM with a relatively low reload compared to a lot of the others in the class, it means you can actually have way more effective DPM because you can get multiple shots out into an opponent before they return to cover, or as they're crossing somewhere. For example, you might get one shot off at the beginning of where they can cross and another one before they get into cover on the other side of where they could cross on your view area that you can see them in. So removing the rapid loading and the steady aim is going to definitely nerf pretty much all of the high alpha TDs. It will affect all of the tanks in the entire game, including heavy vehicles. But the problem was that heavy vehicles were unfortunately being targeted like the most, because obviously heavy tanks much slower, they get caught out in the open much more. They typically can't remain undetected and were often the victim of the high alpha TDs and high alpha vehicles on the enemy team, which was the whole point. And when you consider that the penetration buffs that we've been seeing recently within World of Tanks console, you basically have this issue where, you know, things like the FE 215B183 have 310 pen, which for most tanks, you are not going to be able to bounce anything with 310 pen. Like even in a super heavy, something like, for example, the E100, it can go through your actual turret, even with some of the buffs that it's received. Your upper plate can be penned if they're above you. Like they can auto aim sometimes at you and pen. If you're angling slightly off, like even just a minuscule amount, they can go straight through your side because of all of the penetration buffs that we've seen and the kind of over buffing of penetration to counter the fact that, you know, a lot of tanks can't pen something or whatever. And over time, this has made heavy tanks much, much worse because everything is getting better, including the tier 8. So if we take a tier 8 that was relatively recent, so I guess the Diamondback was a few years ago, but you can see it, on its premium rounds, it has 285 millimeters of premium pen on its premium rounds, which is ridiculous. That is higher than tier 10 medium standard rounds. And considering that tier 10s can't really bounce 285 if you're aiming at them at like not the worst place armor, at tier 8, you're going straight through them everywhere. And in a tier 8 heavy, which typically have worse armor, it's much, much worse. So all of these changes are going to make it a lot harder for these tank destroyers to actually hit you, which kind of counters the whole penetration. And whilst I do think that Wargaming should be reviewing some of the penetration values that we do see on some of these high alpha vehicles by just making them slightly worse, they did that with the Hesh Star when everyone was just spamming Hesh with 278 penetration, I think it was, with the Hesh, and having like 1850 damage. Yeah, they also have tanks like, for example, the Technodrome with 290 pen on all of its rounds and can deal, which is very, very strong tank in general. And I think got a lot of hate when this thing was entered in, especially considering it wasn't really a, like, how do we say, in-keeping tank with the aesthetic, I think, of what a lot of people actually play this game for. I don't really care about cosmetics, doesn't bother me, as long as the tank's not broken or overpowered, which unfortunately that one was. And so even if we take a look at the tank destroyers from the USA and we go to the tank that was highly played, so if we go tank destroyer, look down the list at the NM116 Panzerjäger, this tank has 320 heat pen. This is a tier 8 tank destroyer that has a 90 mil, a 90 millimeter with 320 heat pen. This is the premium ammo inflation and the premium tank inflation that we've been seeing. So these sorts of tanks definitely need to be reduced down because it makes playing even a tier 10 heavy tank very difficult against even tier 8 vehicles, you know, when those armor could potentially work. And so armor has become very redundant in World of Tanks for the most part, especially if you sacrifice your speed or your DPM or your camo in order to get more armor, which then doesn't really give you a whole lot of armor in the game. So if you are now going to be removing the accuracy and the DPM off of some of the most annoying vehicles, it's definitely going to help out, because the accuracy on these high alpha tanks and TDs, it was the big problem. But obviously that's not the only thing, because we also had gameplay balance changes to tech tree vehicles. So as they said here, World War II mode, mainly tiers 8 to 10, all nations, so every single nation in the game. So there's 120 plus tanks, and what they're going to be doing, considering that these are medium tanks, heavy tanks, and a couple of tank destroyers, 15, shell alpha damage updates. So shell alpha, obviously how much damage a shell is doing, not necessarily how much damage one specific tank is doing. So if a shell, like the actual shell, so say you're firing a 120mm L8 blah 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 designated main armament on a tank, that is an upgradable package on an American tank that's shared between multiple tanks. If it fires a specific shell in that caliber, when they change the shell alpha, it's going to change the shell alpha on all of those tanks. So I believe on one of the live streams, or at least what I saw on Clone Guy's video, I believe it was ripped from a live stream, is that obviously the actual damage that the tanks are doing is getting increased from like 400 to 420 or whatever. I think that was, I can't remember exactly, it's just what I think was on there. But the shell alpha damage seems like if they're going to do that, that is going to be applied to multiple tanks at a time. And considering that we have 60 mediums, 50 heavy tanks, it's likely that we're going to see some of these heavies and mediums getting shell alpha damage updates. Now, whether that is negatives or positives, I would assume, considering that this update seems to be focused towards making these tanks more usable and distributing out the actual tank destroyers and the overpowered tanks that have been rolling around on the battlefield. I would hazard a guess that these tanks are going to be the ones that are going to receive the shell alpha damage updates, and maybe some of the tank destroyers as well. You know, some of the ones that aren't really played very much, I wouldn't see them actually buffing any of your like overpowered tank destroyers in the game, hopefully. And in fact, I would much rather them see actual nerfs to some of those tank destroyers, things like the SU-152 Turan and yeah, those sorts of vehicles. So that would be really nice. As well as a few premium tanks are also getting updated, so maybe you'll see that translated across if they're medium tanks or heavy tanks that are premium vehicles that share the same main armament. Maybe that will be the case, because I think they had the Kranvang and I don't know what the other vehicle was showcased in the live stream, but they both shared a 120 and they both got alpha damage buffs. So I would assume that we would see alpha damage of all of the weapons maybe getting buffed. So yeah, we may see heavy tanks and mediums being able to deal more damage, and tank destroyers receiving the same amount of damage, hopefully. No buffs to their alphas, hopefully. And so it will close that gap as well as open up that gap between accuracy, because typically mediums and heavies are a little bit more accurate because heavy tanks drive slower, and so the bloom never goes out to like a huge radius anyway, and medium tanks have good accuracy to begin with, so when you remove the overpowered accuracy, it just means that they have good accuracy. Whereas tank destroyers, when you add accuracy, it means they have good accuracy. When you remove the accuracy perk, it means that they have average to, you know, okay, bad accuracy. So yes, we may be seeing the Dirk KV2 return, which will be good fun, because it makes the game feel rewarding when you hit shots that you shouldn't hit. And yes, I am saying to the tank destroyers camping in the base, and auto-aiming people across the map that you are playing badly, that you shouldn't get rewarded for auto-aiming across the map whilst moving at 50 kilometers an hour and hitting exactly where the person is. That is not actually good gameplay. And whilst I don't necessarily say that that's bad for the player to do that, because it works, that's how the game is currently, I don't think it lends itself to a healthy gameplay style that is actually rewarding for players, because whenever I hit someone across the move in an FE 4005, I don't go, wow, I hit someone across the move on the move. That is ridiculous. I think, oh yeah, of course I'm going to hit. The tank has ridiculous accuracy. Like you don't get the same thrill that you used to when you were playing those high alpha tanks, that when you did actually hit, you're like, yes, finally I've hit. And like, whilst it might seem like you're doing less damage when the update goes live, hopefully, when the alpha, like the reduction in accuracy and stuff actually comes into the game, which I think it should do. Wargaming, please do that. Yes, it's going to shift up the meta, which in all intents and purposes, just shifting up the meta, even if it makes it like the same, like in terms of like the tanks different, and they're in like the game is in the similar sort of play style in terms of how it's actually playing, like, you know, it's still not great or whatever, or even if it's just a little bit better, changing up the meta actually, you know, gives you something fresh to play and the game doesn't feel as stale. So I think that even if they switch it up and it doesn't go as planned, so it's not as good of a change, I think it's still better that they're shifting things up and moving them around. This is something that I think I've mentioned before, but I actually think that if you evolve the game, so make these massive changes and switch up the meta completely, it's actually kind of nice because it gives kind of a global refresh as to what people can play. And, you know, maybe you really enjoy playing light tanks, and in the current situation that they're in right now, at least on World War II I'm talking about, not Cold War, before I see any comments saying that light tanks are overpowered. You know, maybe you really enjoy that, but the current meta just doesn't really lend itself to that, and it kind of makes them redundant, or at least just very minuscule amounts of time where they're actually useful in the game, that you can have a chance where light tanks are much better versus, you know, mediums or whatever. So I think shifting up and giving new refreshment to how the gameplay styles make the game actually play, I think that's really important for like long-term health of the game, because, you know, if the game plays exactly the same for like 5 years and 6 years, people get bored. Even people that are new will get bored pretty quickly. It doesn't take long for a meta to become stale. So, you know, switching things up, nerfing and buffing tanks is a really good way to switch it up and make tanks that were not viable really viable, and make tanks that were overpowered less viable, and so people have to spread out and focus on different things and not just play the same tanks that are really good so that they can actually do well. So yeah, I think that's really important. Plus, it also educates the player base, so like the more knowledge that you try and force into people by opening up their horizons to not just playing big alpha means big damage, I think is really important, because a lot of the time, if you are a experienced player and you're playing something like an FE 4202, the medium that we mentioned earlier, you can have some incredible games. We're talking like 10k damage, 11, 12k damage, and can consistently do more damage than some of these high alpha TDs. Once you get used to them and actually play them correctly, it's not so much like big alpha, big damage, but getting to the point where you've learnt them is very difficult, because you have all of these high alpha TDs that take half or 3/4 of your health in one shot, which is not particularly very nice to play against. It's very annoying. You know, even if you play a perfect game, if someone decides that I choose you, which I call the I choose you mechanic, where they just YOLO straight at you, there's not a whole lot you can do if they've just chosen you, that you're gonna be the one that's gonna take their 1800 damage hit, or 1400, or their 3000 clip potential, and remove you from the game at the cost of their own game themselves, both of you going back to the garage because one player decided to make a stupid play that was not the best play that they could have made. So obviously that's the YOLO side. Happens to everyone, whether it's me or anyone, especially at the start of the game. It can be really annoying, because obviously you as a player, you might be the best player in the world, but if a Waffle E100 YOLO's around the corner, maybe you survive, but they would have to be extremely bad, because of the fact that they would have to miss you a lot for you not to survive in something like a tier 8 medium. There's nothing you could have done. They just decided to make a silly play, and you have to pay the price for that. And they can clip you like twice over. If you're playing a light tank, probably 3 times over. So yeah, those sorts of things I think will be helped out with the new changes, and I think mediums and heavies will be in a slightly better place. I'm still not sure about light tanks because there hasn't been a whole lot of information about light tanks concealments and generally just the spotting being so good, which I think is still a very big problem, that pretty much any tank in the game can get way over capped on their view range, including the super heavies that typically don't have good view range because everyone can run advanced optics and all of the crew skill perks that give you extra view range alongside enhanced combat rations to mean that they can spot anyone that actually shoots them within the range of the max view range. So unless they're like triple bushing or they're a light tank in a bush behind the bush when they're firing at you, like if you are in the bush and you're firing like close to max, heavies can still spot you, which means that, you know, actually using spotting mechanics in the correct way that they're supposed to be can be really frustrating because you can get spotted in places that, like, technically you probably shouldn't just get spotted in. And it means that, yeah, it's very difficult to actually spot people in tanks that are supposed to be really good at actually spotting people and not getting spotted. So it's the not getting spotted back is the problem right now. When you're in a light tank and you're rolling around, you spot a heavy tank and they spot you instantly back because they've got way over max cap of view range. So that can be a problem. Is it the worst problem in the game? Probably not, but it is an additional one, so I'd like to see them actually try to balance the view range differences between all of the classes a little bit better, or maybe just reduce the buff of enhanced combat rations to not give you extra view range on heavy tanks, for example, or mediums for that matter, so that light tanks actually get that bonus again, at least in World War II. So that's kind of some of the things I wanted to talk about it. Definitely tank destroyers are going to be affected. And I think if we look at if we go to tier 10, the highest win rate vehicles, Rogue Dawn, Lemon Russ, Type 5, ST2, you've got lots of tanks that are above all of these tank destroyers that are getting played the most. But the reason for this is that even though these tanks get played the most, and they have the highest alpha, they might not necessarily deal the most damage because a lot of the time it's very easy to do, say, 2,000 damage in a tank destroyer with 1,400 damage base that can splash people for 600. But to actually get higher damage results, it's a lot harder. So they typically don't have the best win rates, which yet again leads to the issue of, like, maybe you get a load of high alpha TDs that, you know, annihilate people that you're trying to focus on and get damage yourself, but they aren't particularly the best because it doesn't really teach you anything. And so the players that play them a lot, so they main tank destroyers with high alpha, they don't really understand the full game mechanics because they don't need to play those vehicles. So yeah, I think nerfing them to the point where they aren't as easy to just auto aim and click or shoot from miles away and hit every single time, it will force people to actually branch out into different things, making the game a little bit more healthy, and you can try different tanks without getting punished so hard. So that is something I think is really important. But with that being said, hopefully you enjoyed this video. That's my thoughts on the whole tank destroyer meta, the current state of World of Tanks console, why I think it isn't particularly that fun. And yeah, hopefully some of these changes will come to actually solve that. And yes, I do play tank destroyers as well. I just don't particularly enjoy them because I find them quite boring. But at the same time, I'm sure there's lots of people who play tank destroyers. They shouldn't be like completely impossible to play anymore. It's just that they're not going to be as overpowered. And so you might actually have to learn how to play them properly rather than just sniping at the back with ridiculous accuracy. So I think that's important to say as well. So thank you very much for watching. Of course, like the video if you did and subscribe down below for more. And I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.